All right, we're talking about public opinion, and I'm not doing the chapter summaries, although I need to catch up on those. Instead, this is a really important piece. These are important pieces of this that I want to make sure that I capture, and I'm allowing myself to do it poorly because it would rely on kind of going through in the chapter summary sense and pulling out quotes and things like that. And I don't have the energy for that at this moment. So I just want to summarize kind of some big ideas and things that I've considered. So I think there was a clear sort of diversion from this like total alignment that I felt in reading the first half of this book to these later parts. Just in the sense, I think the later parts get into some of the challenges of the individual versus society, and individual choice and mental faculties and things like that. And his criticism of some of the communist ideas that I don't necessarily, I align to them, not because I believe in the entire communist system, but because they are applicable to some of the other things that I believe in. And so in a sense, although he was talking about communism, I felt like he was criticizing some of the things that I do believe in. So notably, and this is one where I have to I've been presented this information and it might change my view a little bit, is that public opinion, let's do it like that. Public opinion is reliant on what he's describing as the machine. Essentially, that any collective thoughts themselves, in this case, like public opinion, doesn't really necessarily form from every individual believing that thing. There's usually one source or a group who presents that information, and people say either yes or no to that, and that's sort of how public opinion is formed. And that a fundamental flaw of traditional Marxist thinking is that it supposes that individuals, it's in their nature to make every choice for themselves. But the reality is, if you're making every trivial decision, you would never do anything. And that's sort of the promise of division of labor, right? Kind of in the same vein. Other things. So ultimately, we move to this point, and he's proven to me, like, what he is proving is that on some level, right, so he's very good about addressing the order of kind of the US, the hierarchy, the structures in place, which I appreciate. He is looking at the structural integrity. And what he does a very nice job of, and something that I haven't been able to articulate, is showing how we have to move from, or that thoughts, opinions, ideas, governments, right, they come out of an era with a particular set of thinking and shared experiences that change over time and are therefore the individual relationship to it at different points in time or across space, in different regions, states, or whatever. You interact with it differently with these parameters. And ultimately, he determines that, or so far, has said that there was one fundamental flaw in the formation of our government, which was a lack of knowledge tools to assess this bigger picture. And so this is something that I've made an argument for in the past. Like, the idea that the US was formed at a particular time and it looked very particular in that moment. It was much smaller, there were less people, right? It's a reaction to the monarchy, yada, yada, yada. And so I don't know, it's stuff like things like weaponry. They couldn't conceive of weaponry advancing much further than guns, and so the right to bear arms is kind of a weird example of this, where in theory, if you're putting your mind in the minds of the founding fathers at that time in that environment, the argument is essentially you should be able to bear the same weaponry as the authority in that government to be able to defend yourself against that authority, right? But it would be inconceivable that you could have like a weaponized drone or bombs as a Second Amendment right. And so that's an example, but more accurately, it's just the sense that at that time we were this rural and sprawling country, and our understanding of citizenship and citizen participation in government was heavily dependent on this idea of like villages and small towns. And so it didn't account for scale. And notably, the only thing that I'll pull out right now, the community could take its supply of information for granted, its codes it passed on through schools, church, and family, and the power to draw deductions from a premise rather than the ability to find the premise was regarded as the chief end of intellectual training. Right, so that's kind of the drawback, and we are experiencing the ramifications of this, or the effects of this in the long term. Right, like if you're a country of like these villages, these towns, there's not really a ton of need because there was so much immediate need in your immediate environment that was such a shared experience that there wasn't a ton of diversity of experience, therefore not a ton of diversity of thought. And so everything seemed very obvious and clear cut, and you could just kind of pass down the traditions and sustain and develop that way. That's not the case anymore, but something like the value that's passed on, of only needing to identify, to draw deductions from a premise rather than the ability to find a premise, this is something that we're kind of in the throes of confronting right now. So anyway, in short, there's a lot to examine here. Oh, and one other thing that I'll call out is he has a quote talking about, again, the perspectives or the ways that each kind of theory of governance promises, or thoughts that they have, or ways that they might interpret a situation. Was that, come on, is it not in here? The anarchistic are inclined to think that a more divine concord would be heard if each player improvised as he went along. So showing the idea here being a conductor for a symphony who sees to it that each man plays his part. Right. I would say, and again, a divergence here in thinking, I think more accurately, the anarchistic sense of the orchestra analogy, or the symphony analogy, is that you play more in like a blues or jazz fashion, where there are moments of improvised playing that are permitted by the structure. So everyone has the opportunity to improvise and take over and have their moment, right? But there are sort of these, it comes from a deep understanding of the other players and what you're doing. It has to fit within sort of this formula of scales or whatever, and it works or it doesn't. It's like, that's the thing about like blues or jazz, like you kind of know when someone is crushing it, or like you can go and take a solo, and if it doesn't fit within that song, it's going to sound bad, right? That's sort of the anarchist promise in my mind. So just a few thoughts. Yeah, there's a ton more to capture, and I hope that I go back and do it, but just not right now.